So we have seen various ways of useEffect. The one more very important way of useEffect is implementing component will unmount kind of life cycle. With class-based components, we had component will unmount. If you have to do the similar thing with useEffect, you can use this syntax. The function with a return statement can contain the cleanup code. Let's practically try to understand. And to understand this, I have created a kind of structure where there is an app.js. Inside this, I'm going to put a button. I'll say button. This is going to be a toggle button. So it is going to show or hide a component. The component is going to show the X and Y coordinates whenever I move the mouse. Here is the component, the show XY, and I have not yet written anything inside that. So first of all, let me just type some code here. In this, I'm going to take a string which is going to contain the X and Y, and there will be, let's say, change XY. This is going to be the setter method. And here I'm going to take the use state, and the first thing I want is 0, 0. And inside this division, we are going to have an h1, and with this we are displaying the X and Y. The next thing is we go back to app.js, and first of all, let me straight away display the show XY component and check whether we are getting it or not. Let me correct this. It is the state which we want to display. So here we have now 0, 0. X and Y we are planning to display. But before that, we will add the useEffect here, and there are multiple reasons. Here I want that when I click on this toggle button, I want to show and hide the component. That means I'm going to unload the component also. It's going to be conditional rendering. So how do we do that? Let me take another state here, which I will say show data or show XY, whatever we name it, and change state is the method for it. In the beginning, it is going to be true. So I want that when the app.js is loaded, first time the show XY component should also be displayed. Then when I click on the button, at that time, we want to change the state. So I'll say change state, and you already know now that we can toggle it using an exclamation sign. So now the show data, if it is true, then it will show the show XY, otherwise it will not. Next thing, I want to have a condition here. So we can use a ternary operator. Because I want to use JavaScript, I'm going to open the curly brackets here and close it here. Of course, I can put an if condition also, but the easier way is that if the show data is true, then I want to show XY. Otherwise, let's say I want to display an h1 saying that no data to display. That's it. And because we are passing parameter here, I'm going to add a function. Now let's see the output. I'll just refresh it first. Toggle. So the component is unloaded and the h1, this h1 is executed. Again, when I click toggle, it's going to display the X and Y. So now we have conditional rendering. That is, if the show data is true, display the component, else just display something else. So component will not be existing. Now we try to check the useEffect in this situation. I'll say useEffect. We have already seen that when the component is re-rendered, the useEffect is called. So here I just want to display console log and display a message also that useEffect called. Now let me also add the syntax which I was talking about. So I'll say return and the arrow function, and I add another console log saying cleanup code. That's it. Now I will refresh. Now you see that the useEffect is called. That means this section is called, but not this one. This will be called when the component is unloaded, like this. You see, it displays no data here and the cleanup code console log is executed. Again, when I show it, it's the useEffect which is getting called. That is this one. Again, I just click on toggle and it says cleanup code. So now you should get the idea that when I try to unload the component, At that time, if I want to execute something, I can use this syntax. Let's try this. I will use one method called window.addEventListener. Inside this, I want to configure the mouse move event. And I'm going to call the function. The function name is, for example, display x and y. That means when the component is re-rendered, I'm going to add the mouse event, which will eventually call display xy, and that's going to update the x and y coordinates. So here I'm writing that function also, const display xy. Here there will be an argument, the synthetic event, which will contain the event related information. Here I'll change the xy. So I'll say change xy. What I want is that I take a string here, and every time when the mouse is moved, I'm going to update this with e dot. Let's say we take page x and we take e dot page y. So this str is updated, and the change xy will have this new string every time when the mouse is moved. Not only that, I will add a console log in the display xy function. Now I'm going to refresh the output. As you can see, the x and y is getting displayed, both console log and on the component as well. Now let me click on the toggle button. So if you observe, the no data is displayed and the cleanup code message is also getting executed in the console. But the moment I move the mouse, the console log is still displaying the data. It is getting updated. It means when the component is re-rendered, the event listener was registered, but when the component actually got unloaded, at that time this event has to be unregistered as well. That means you have to remove the event when the component is unloaded, otherwise it keeps on executing. In spite of you clicked on the toggle button, the component is not there on the screen, but still the methods or related subscriptions are existing. So you need to unsubscribe, you need to unload those things. So here in this return, I'm going to say window.remove event listener. The event you want to remove is the mouse move event. And of course, the method which you are already calling is display xy. Now let's refresh the page. We have the event getting fired. Now I click on the toggle. Now if I move the mouse, you observe that there is nothing getting executed, right? So the purpose of having this syntax where you have a return statement, you put a function, is because whenever you see that there is a code which you need to unsubscribe, you want to clean up the code, right? Then you can try this syntax. This actually replaces component will unmount of class-based component. If you wish to implement the component will unmount of class component inside a functional component with a hook, then you have to use the useEffect with a returned function. So let's talk about relative questions. The first question is, how can you write mount and unmount kind of phases with the functional component, or explain cleanup code with useEffect hook? So for mounting, we write it like this. For unmounting, we have to return this function inside the useEffect, and that is executed when the unmount phase is fired. And for the same answer, the question can be, how will you configure component will unmount inside a functional component? So again, the answer is, if you wish to implement the component will unmount of class component inside a functional component with a hook, then you have to use the useEffect with a returned function. Another question is that which component lifecycle methods are handled by useEffect in a functional component. You can think of useEffect hook as component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount combined. It means whatever process you could manage in these three lifecycle methods, you can manage with useEffect hook in a functional component.